Thank you, Gellert, for the invitation again. So when I first heard about the topic judicial dialogue, I was thinking about presenting something on the big judgments of the German Federal Constitutional Court because, yeah, we all know them. But then I already presented something on that 2 years ago, so the German in me was, of course, like, I need something new. So I am talking about, a bit more broad thoughts on the term judicial dialogue, and I'm very curious to also hear your thoughts on my take on that. That's why also the question mark is so important, because I am wondering if we have something like a dialogue between courts, if that is even possible when we talk about courts, if they can have a dialogue, or if it's just, a wishful thinking, an idea we want to have, between the courts of Europe. And I have some points that prove, I think, that it's very hard to actually establish this kind of judicial dialogue in Europe between the courts. It takes place, but it's dependent on various factors that lies outside of the influence of the courts. And so it's very hard to actually get this kind of dialogue. And I want to prove that with 3 cases that all are climate litigation cases, one from the German Federal Constitutional Court, one from the European Court of Human Rights, and one of the Court of Justice of the European Union. But first of all, let's start with the idea of judicial dialogue. Where does it come from? So actually the term is very present in the US constitutional discourse. It explains the role of the courts in regards to the other branches of power, so the executive and the legislature. And then this discussion came to Europe, and here we don't use this term when we talk about the different branches of power. We use it between the different courts in Europe. So between usually the national constitutional courts, the Court of Justice of the European Union, and the European Court of Human Rights. So the interaction between these 3 courts in Europe, mostly in regards to the protection of fundamental rights. So the idea is we want these courts to work together in kind of a dialogue in order to get the best possible protection of fundamental rights, right? That's the idea. And I think that's a great idea, actually. But I doubt that it's so easy to reach in every dimension, every issue we have with fundamental rights. Because dialogue, when we think a bit further, the word dialogue means we talk, right? More than one party. We don't have a monologue. We have parties that interact with each other, listen to each other, address and challenges what the other person or court said, and state their opinion. And then in the end of the dialogue, we have this compromise on the best argument. And that's very easy to have with actual people, but here we have courts talking through judgments, because courts do judgments, right? So this is already a limitation, because we only can talk through judgments, not actual words. To prove some more points, I want to present the 3 climate cases. Why climate cases? It's not, I mean, we have judicial dialogue, or we analyze judicial dialogue in not only climate cases, but very broad sense of fundamental rights protection. I chose them because last year, the European Court of Human Rights had this landmark ruling, Klimaseniorinnen, you might have heard of. And so it's very recent. That's why I chose the climate litigation cases. We need cases on similar issues in order to analyze if there is a judicial dialogue or not. So that's why I took the climate case of the German Federal Constitutional Courts, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, that's the first one, short for Bundesverfassungsgericht, which ruled its case in 2021. And then the Carvalho case, you might also have heard of it. It's also from 2021, also on climate issue. So we have the same issue, but different settings, different courts, or the courts we want to talk about. From a German perspective, that's why the German Federal Constitutional Court. So I'm gonna dive in quickly into the rulings so that you actually know what I'm talking about, and afterwards I'm gonna analyze it. The climate ruling of the German Federal Constitutional Court was successful. In regards to the admissibility, the individuals from Germany, but also from abroad, was successful. Only NGOs weren't successful. So, generally, very broad standing for individuals. On the merits, it was also successful, and the German Federal Constitutional Court invented something weird. The right to intertemporal freedom. It's new. It's a new dimension of protection and fundamental rights. So weird. And the consequence was that the German Climate Change Act was struck down in parts. So very successful judgment within Germany. Also lots of reaction afterwards, because it basically said Germany didn't do enough to protect us individuals from the adverse effects of climate change. The opposite happened with Carvalho on the European Union level. So the claim was basically similar, because it was also, please, institutions of the European Union protect us from the adverse effects of climate change. So you have to do more. Your directives, your regulations aren't enough on the European Union level. But the claim wasn't successful at all. They brought an action for annulment under 263, Section 4 TFEU, and the Court of Justice of the European Union basically said, well, yeah, no, it's not admissible, because Plowman formula, if you're familiar with that, you have to be individually concerned, and the court ruled you are not. Not the individuals, also not the NGOs. So the Court of Justice of the European Union, no judgment from there, nothing on the merits. And then last year we have the judgment of the Court of Human Rights, or European Court of Human Rights, and it was like a really crazy judgment, because individuals was not granted standing, so no victim status. You have to prove that you're a victim for admissibility. But the court ruled that the association, from including all the elderly women, got standing without having a victim status, even though the law says also NGOs have to prove that they are a victim, such as individuals. So new path, on the merits, same outcome in the end, or a similar outcome than as the German Federal Constitutional Court. Not that weird intertemporal freedom thing, but also successful, right? So very interesting, because it's not in the law, but it was successful. So in regards to climate protection, really good outcome for them. So what that already might have showed is that judicial dialogue is dependent on procedural filters, right? You have to go through a certain procedural law in order to get the case before the court, before this respective court, which is rather easy for individuals within Germany, right? They granted in the climate cases, they granted a broad standing for individuals, no problem. For NGOs, it's very hard in Germany. Whereas before the Court of Justice of the European Union, super hard for everyone in climate cases. So the procedural filter is really restrictive. Then new route before the Court of Human Rights, it's now easy in climate cases for the NGOs, hard as we know it for individuals. So we can see that this is already the first filter in regards to which cases are before the courts. And these are the cases we do the dialogue, right? So this is already a huge factor that influences how a judicial dialogue can play out in practice, the procedural filter. Second, what does also matter is the timing and the sequencing of the cases, because now we have this huge case of the Court of Human Rights, right? So all the following cases should take that into account somehow, or we already discussing it how the Court of Justice of the European Union must, consider this huge ruling, and now must change its own judgments from Carvalho and stuff like that. So this also influences how a dialogue can play out in practice, which cases are already there, which was already decided. So timing matters. Also, what is also plays in this factor is the zeitgeist thing, right? This is also very present in the climate change cases, because 20 years ago, maybe, we wouldn't have any of these cases being successful, because the discussion within the general public was completely different, right? It wasn't that present that we really have to protect our, environment, and we need to go there, and courts have to really work for that as well, because parliaments are failing us and stuff like that. So zeitgeist also is something that influences the way we have a judicial dialogue. Last factor I identified are also institutional roles. So the German Federal Constitutional Court is a very strong constitutional court within Germany, which really is accepted very highly. So it can rule also sometimes in a weird way, like the right to intertemporal freedom, right? And it's very broadly accepted usually. The Court of Justice of the European Union, its task is to ensure that EU law is implemented uniformly. So its task, its role, its institutional role is completely different to the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany. So is the European Court of Human Rights, because this is an invention of the international organization, right? So it's the states participated voluntarily. So of course it risks much more if it goes weird ways, I would say. Yeah. So different mandates, which also influences the dialogue. This is just like a choice of factors, but I think I made my point clear, right? So we have outside factors that really influence a judicial dialogue, and that cannot be influenced by the courts. So the actors that do the dialogue cannot influence which cases reach them, when do they reach them, which cases have already reached them before that, and its institutional role, of course, cannot be influenced as well. So we could think about, now that we know that it's really hard to plan this kind of judicial dialogue on fundamental rights issues, we could think about to change that. Maybe we want to formalize a dialogue between judges, between the courts. Maybe they should meet, I don't know, every 3 months and discuss fundamental rights issues, right? And come to the best convincing argument in the end. So in the end, we have this great protection in Europe. Nice idea. This is also discussed in the current discussion about enlargement of the EU. We discuss how we have to prepare for that. And so there's one reform proposal wanting to set up a joint chamber of highest courts, where the Court of Justice of the European Union meet with all the judges of the national constitutional courts within the European Union. So that would be a pro argument. I haven't made up my mind on that, because there's also a huge con argument, I think, a huge risk, because for us, of course, we know we're legal scholars. We know that there is not this one way of interpreting the law, right? That's our job. There are different opinions on the law. But I think it's hard to, for the general public, if they knew that, the judges would meet every 3 months and discuss how to solve this case or this issue on fundamental rights, that there might be the risk of, I call it demystification of the courts, kind of, well, maybe in the general public, there's more the idea of the courts show us this one right way, the light at the end of the tunnel. And then it would be more like, well, they meet in some kind of chamber and, decide on how we do it, right? So this might lead to a loss of acceptance, which is really important for our courts. So this is a really risky reform proposal, in my opinion, as well. So conclusion. Judicial dialogue, in my opinion, is often aspirational, not a descriptive term. The climate cases, for example, show how fragmentary it is. It takes place, it is there, no question, but it is dependent on so many factors that cannot be influenced. So it's really hard to create this moment, right? So it's also a big time for strategic litigation, actually. And we can see that in the climate cases, they're really big, have a really big backup. And we can think about formalizing it if we want to, but there's also this risk of demystification of our judicial process. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.